The morning after the raid did not feel like morning. It felt like exhaustion that refused to leave. Smoke still clung to the outer courtyards of the Eisenwald estate. Burned timber had been dragged aside, broken armor stacked in silent piles near the armory. The smell of wet ash mixed with iron made the air heavy enough to taste. Lucian stood at the edge of a damaged walkway, watching servants wash blood from stone. No one spoke loudly. Even the knights moved differently now, slower, quieter, as if volume itself might summon another disaster. The monster attack had ended, but nothing felt resolved. It felt like a warning that had already happened too late. Cedric returned first. He arrived at dawn on a wounded horse, armor dented and darkened by dried blood. 2 knights helped him dismount. He refused further assistance and walked on his own, even though his left arm hung slightly unsteady at his side. Leonhardt arrived later, escorting a column of surviving soldiers and injured villagers. Neither brother spoke much. That silence said enough. The frontier had survived. Barely. Lucian watched from a distance as medical tents were raised in the courtyard. His father stood at the center of it all, speaking with commanders in low, controlled tones. His voice never rose, but every sentence shifted decisions immediately. A man used to managing collapse. But even he paused once. When a report was placed in his hand, Lucian noticed that pause. Only for a second. But it was there. Something had changed in the way the territory functioned now. Not broken, exposed. That night, Lucian did not sleep. He returned to the abandoned workshop. The same place that had once felt like curiosity now felt like necessity. Rain tapped against the roof in steady rhythm as he examined what remained of his earlier experiments. Half-burned markings on wood, cracked metal tubes, charred mineral fragments still faintly warm with residual mana. Everything had survived the raid untouched. Ironically, the workshop had been ignored by the monsters entirely. Because it was irrelevant, that thought stayed with him longer than it should have. The first idea came while he was cleaning debris. Not a weapons, a delay. He picked up a broken iron rod and studied it carefully. The monsters had not broken through because of strength alone. They had broken through because defenses reacted after impact. Every countermeasure depended on visibility or sound. Everything required awareness first, which meant there was always a delay, even a small one. But delay, he realized, was a form of weakness. If an enemy could act faster than response, then defense always arrived too late. Lucian set the rod down slowly. What if, he murmured to himself, the response is already placed before the attack happens? The idea was not emotional. It was structural. Over the next several days, he began collecting materials from storage. No one questioned him. He was still the third son, still invisible in the hierarchy of urgency. That invisibility allowed him access to discarded military equipment without interference. Old explosive powder samples from failed siege experiments. Monoreactive crystal shards recovered from mining tunnels. Iron casings originally designed for crossbow mechanisms. None of it was refined, but refinement was not the goal. Function was. The first prototype nearly killed him. He had buried a small container filled with compressed black powder and monoreactive dust beneath a test patch of ground behind the workshop. The trigger mechanism was simple: pressure distortion. A crude concept based on his observation that mana density shifted when heavy objects moved across unstable soil layers. When he tested it manually, nothing happened at first. He stepped closer, crouched, checked the alignment. Then, the ground exploded upward with a violent crack. Lucian was thrown backward into the dirt as a shockwave tore through the soil. Stones shattered. Earth sprayed into the air like boiling water. The sound echoed across the estate walls. For a moment, everything went silent. Then alarms rang out. Knights rushed toward the sound of the blast. Lucian lay still, not unconscious, just evaluating. The explosion radius was inconsistent. Containment failure at uneven mana dispersion. But the core principle worked. The reaction had triggered without needing visibility, without needing human intervention. It had activated automatically. He slowly sat up. Dirt slid from his hair. A faint burn mark spread across his sleeve. And for the first time since arriving in this world, Lucian allowed himself a small, quiet breath of satisfaction. "You nearly blew up half the estate." The voice came from behind him. Lucian turned. Cedric stood there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. His armor was gone, replaced with simple training clothes, but the exhaustion in his face was still obvious. Lucian looked back at the crater. It was controlled. Cedric exhaled through his nose. That's not comforting. Lucian did not respond immediately. Instead, he walked toward the edge of the blast zone and crouched again, studying the soil pattern. Impact timing was correct, he said, but dispersal radius is unstable. Cedric frowned. You're analyzing it like a report. It is a report, Lucian replied. A pause. Cedric studied him for a moment longer, then glanced at the crater again. What exactly are you trying to make? Lucian hesitated, not because he didn't know, because he was still forming the correct way to express it. A system, he said finally. Cedric blinked. A system. Lucian nodded once. One that reacts before people die. That answer lingered between them longer than expected. Cedric did not immediately respond. For once, he seemed unsure whether to dismiss it or understand it. By the end of the week, Lucian had refined the concept. He no longer thought in terms of traps. He thought in layers. Detection, trigger, response. Each one independent, each one redundant. If one layer failed, another would compensate. He began burying small monoreactive devices along forest approach paths outside the estate boundary. Not deep enough to be visible, but carefully spaced according to terrain flow patterns he had mapped mentally after the raid. Knights noticed strange markers at first. Small disturbed patches of soil, thin wire-like structures hidden under roots. But no one removed them, because the Baron had given no order to interfere with the third son's tests. The second monster encounter came sooner than expected. A scouting wave this time. Smaller, vaster, testing the territory. Lucian did not see them directly. He only heard the result. A low series of distant detonations echoed through the forest like rolling thunder trapped under earth. Then silence. Later that evening, a patrol returned from the western line. Confused, alert, alive. One of them reported finding monster bodies scattered along a forest path they had not engaged on. No knight had been deployed there. No spellcasters, no direct combat. The creatures had simply crossed into an area they should not have entered, and then stopped existing. The report reached the estate hall before sunset. Baron Aldrich read it in silence, then reread it. Cedric stood beside him, arms crossed, jaw tight. Leonhardt narrowed his eyes slightly, studying the implications rather than the wording. Lucian was not present. He was still in the workshop, adjusting spacing, refining trigger sensitivity, improving stability. He did not know yet that the system he had begun building was already being spoken about in the highest room of the estate. But if he had known, he would not have reacted, because in his mind it was still incomplete, still fragile, still just an idea. Outside, the forest remained quiet, but for the first time in years, it no longer felt like it was simply watching. It felt like it was waiting for something to respond back.